They may look like people, but they're not. Humanoids, at least in the sense of the word as I'm using it here, are creatures that may be shaped like people, or even behave like us, but they are something far more disturbing. From encounters with Bigfoot to terrifying unexplained monsters, these are allegedly real sightings of humanoid creatures in the forest. If you have a scary experience, share it with us at darkstories.org. I'd love to hear encounters that took place in the snow. If you enjoy this show and want to support it, like this video and share it with friends and family. Also, do you believe in Bigfoot? Comment your answer below, and maybe even link us to some evidence that helped you make up your mind. Now, let's begin. The Whistler, from Spidermilk. My family moved out to Texas almost 5 years ago, and for most of that time we've lived in a spacious suburban house that we now own. I live with my mom, younger sister, her dog, and my 2 cats. This all started the summer of 2016, when the mobile game Pokemon Go was reaching the height of its hype and popularity. Despite my extreme dislike of hot weather, I wanted to hop on that bandwagon, so I'd venture out into the neighborhood while using the app in search of virtual Pokemon to catch. While out one hot, humid afternoon, I ran into another kid who turned out to be playing the same game. We exchanged greetings and chatted for a while at the local park. I'll refer to him as Brandon. Brandon was down to earth, upbeat, and sweet. He clearly wasn't afraid to gush about what games he liked to an otherwise total stranger, but I didn't mind. His attitude put me at ease. We eventually parted ways, but I met him several other times during the summer. It was a Saturday when things in the neighborhood began to get weird. In Texas, the cicadas or cicadas get really loud at certain times of the year. They sound like millions of dead leaves rattling in the breeze, droning on for hours on end. And it's a good thing that I tended to tune it out, or else it would have bothered me much more. Anyway, that weekend, I hadn't been out playing on the app for a few days. I was eager to meet back up with Brandon and the occasional other kid that I'd run into now and again. I was out walking for probably a little over an hour before I finally found Brandon jumping down the 3 steps from what must have been his house. He saw me straight away, waved, and jogged over. We hung out and played the game for a while, but the sun was beginning to get low in the sky, so I was getting ready to tell him I had to head back home soon. Although I knew the neighborhood fairly well, my mother wouldn't be happy if I came back after dark. But I didn't get the chance to bring it up before both of us stopped in our tracks, facing the end of a road where it opened up into a small field, a private property. A shrill noise had just come from somewhere in the distance. Now, I'm not a superstitious person at all. I enjoy a good scary story now and then like everyone else, but I didn't actually fear anything magical or supernatural. I'm a logical person. Brandon, on the other hand, was clearly on edge. The sound had been short, but the way it had cut through the dull, distant noise of traffic, that was certainly strange. "You good?" I piped up after a minute, nudging the kid, and he nodded quickly. "Psh, I'm fine. It just reminded me of what my baby brother used to say." His little brother was named Tim. I tilted my head. What did he used to say? Brandon shrugged, acting just a little too overly nonchalant about it. "It's dumb, never mind." But of course, I continued to pester him until he finally hung his head, giving a dramatic sigh. Okay. Well, Tim used to have bad dreams because of something he heard from the kids next door. They were just saying it to mess with him. After I didn't respond, staring at my friend in anticipation, he rolled his eyes. "My God, fine. Tim said they told him about these rules. 2 of them, and they're only for this neighborhood. I snorted. What rules? Like homeowners association? Keeping your lawns tidy? Brandon shook his head. No, more like, creepy rules. And it's more for the tracks than the actual neighborhood. To clarify, the tracks are the old abandoned train tracks that run next to the neighborhood, going right past the cul-de-sac we were currently standing in. I had walked it many times before, even crossing the bridge over the river below and exploring the surrounding dirt paths, which people frequented often to hang out and be stupid in. I had never feared that area, but that's just me. It was definitely horror movie material, don't get me wrong. A seemingly endless track in either direction surrounded by tall trees and covered in rust, sometimes graffiti. There had even used to be a train there, sitting motionless, but that had been removed at some point. For what reason and by whom, I have no idea. Brandon explained the 2 creepy rules to me. Rule number 1, never whistle after sundown. Rule number 2, don't look behind you. I laughed when he said that, and so did he, though he seemed more nervous about it. Getting serious, I reassured him that no whistling monster could possibly be out there, and that people were always looking for some legend to be scared of, or something other to believe in. Brandon seemed to calm down at that, and I had to head home since the sun was about to set. As I mentioned, I come to the tracks often to explore and to be in nature, so I headed there around noon one day, sometime in July. I was already overheated, but I was determined to find this one Pokemon I was looking to get. Like so many times before, I was met with the hum of cicadas as I gradually left the asphalt of the neighborhood for the bumpy terrain of the tracks. I walked for roughly half an hour, skipping the bridge in favor of heading down one of the dirt paths by the river's edge. I sat near the water for a while, switching between Pokemon Go and my social media apps as time passed by. I wasn't aware how close to sunset it was until I spotted the time on my phone. Getting to my feet, I took a drink of water from my metal canteen, trying to conserve a last sip for the walk back. That's when I got a notification on my phone. Brandon had sent me a gift on my Pokemon app. I didn't open it just yet. I was actually reminded of those rules he had talked about, and despite my skepticism, I was curious, and definitely scatterbrained. I was curious enough to wonder what would happen if I broke those rules. You could probably guess I'd be the first to be ended in a horror film. So I texted my mom to let her know I was heading back, but since I was further out than usual, I'd be back a little after dark. She wasn't happy about it, but she sternly reminded me to manage my time better next time, so at least I'd avoided a real scolding. Having bought myself some time, I pulled up Snapchat on my phone, hitting record. "Hey Brandon," I said, "I'm about to myth bust those kids' rules right now." I told the camera, and then proceeded to whistle a nursery rhyme. I think it was the Itsy Bitsy Spider. I waited in silence. After not a single scary thing occurred as expected, I turned the camera toward myself and sarcastically raised an eyebrow before ending the video. I sent it to Brandon and started walking back to the neighborhood. Weirdly enough, the noise of cicadas had died down significantly, but I figured I just hadn't noticed it until now, having been previously distracted. So I didn't think much of it. Besides, even if it had been sudden, the worst things out here were deer, coyotes, and maybe even the occasional hobo, so I wasn't really worried. Then something like a crack came from behind me. I turned and looked. Guess that was 2 rules down now. But there was nothing that I could see behind me. I do remember shivering, though, Even the most level-headed people can't shake paranoia sometimes. So I picked up the pace. The nursery rhyme I'd whistled earlier stuck on a rather annoying loop in my head as I clutched my water canteen in case some crazed individual tried to attack me. And then, just as I rounded a bend and saw the streetlights of my neighborhood, there was another noise, something dry and hollow, sounding like the howling of wind, except this wasn't wind. This was more like a long, strained echo, changing its tune subtly in the middle, almost like a whistle. At that point, I was scared, but I didn't take off running, fearing I'd attract the attention of whatever had made the sound. This place felt taboo, like it belonged to someone or something else. Suddenly, I was quite sure that I wasn't supposed to be here. My hands were starting to shake. My anxiety was ramping up until it felt like it coiled itself into my guts, ready to explode with adrenaline at the slightest snap of a twig. However, there was no snap to speak of. No more sounds, no more whistling howls. But I could see movement ahead of me in the tree line to my left, between me and the streetlights. Trees, bushes being pushed just slightly, just enough to be visible. I don't know why, but I crouched down on the train tracks. Sudden movements from me seemed like a bad idea, no matter how much my body was screaming at me to bolt. At first, the shape that stepped out of the bushes looked very much like a bear, a shaggy grayish-brown body. It was certainly long enough, maybe larger, although I wasn't sure there were any bears in Texas as far as I knew. Of course, it wasn't a bear at all, because, as it turned out, moving in the way that an ape or a man might move, but on all fours, my gaze fell on a thing that was the furthest possible entity from a bear. It was hairless for one thing. It had an emaciated, pale body, with some animal hide stretched across its back as if it were armor. Its head was covered by what appeared to be a deer's skull, but I could plainly see that a grisly, deformed face and bust were hiding right underneath. All bony and stretched out, milky white eyes a stark contrast to the shadow the skull cast, and the only feature of its real face I could make out. The thing rose up, the grimy pelt of the skinned animal dragging in the dirt as it did, head twitching as it looked around. By some miracle, it didn't seem to see me at all. So I didn't move. I wanted very much to cry, to be anywhere but here, but I didn't move an inch. Not until the creature fell back onto all fours, skinny limbs splayed out like a spider's. It was then that it raised its head, and I could see its actual jaw moving as it opened its real mouth under the skull. It was awful, the sound that it made, especially up close. I knew it had been what it called out earlier, but up close I could hear the snarl underneath the otherwise soothing, eerie howl. This creature, it was a predator, and it had nearly found me, like a bat finding a moth, by a sick, dangerous game of Marco Polo. Eventually, the thing crawled back into the brush, but I didn't dare move until I saw it scale a large tree and jump out of sight. I crouched the whole way until the streetlights and sprinted back home from there. Needless to say, I haven't been back there alone since. I never told Brandon about it, but as he didn't open my teasing message, I assume he got rid of the app I'd sent it on long ago, so that didn't matter much. Here's a tip, kids. Rules are there for a reason. Don't break them. And for God's sake, do not whistle after sundown. Bigfoot in Gaston, Oregon, from Ryan. It was around 8 or so in the evening when I had my encounter. It happened a long time ago. I was 8 years old and had recently gone into foster care. I remember this sighting as if it happened yesterday. I was over at a family friend's house for dinner. They live out in Gaston, Oregon, and have a hazelnut orchard. The trees in the orchard are about 10 to 15 feet tall. They had 2 boys that my brother and I were having a Nerf gun war with, because of how big the grounds were. My brother and I were standing by the back end of the house. My brother noticed something down in the orchard. "Ryan," he said, a bit freaked out. "Look." I followed his gaze and saw what he was staring at. There was a tall figure walking in between the trees. It stood close to the top of them. That's just how colossal it was. I would guess it was about 10 feet tall, maybe just a bit shorter. We stood there, but I began to panic. "It's Bigfoot!" I shouted to my brother, who was trying to keep his cool. "Be quiet," he said. The Bigfoot paused for a moment before continuing on its way. It was probably going back up into the hills to hunt before returning to the valley the next day. It was a quick but creepy encounter of mine. I've been criticized over my sighting, but I've had people fully believe my story as well. So, if you're ever in Gaston, Oregon, be on the lookout for a Bigfoot. It Hunts Me, from Rawl Brett 260. I'm 17 years old and live in Romania. I live with my grandparents because they're sick and need someone to take care of them. The story begins last year in October, the first day I moved out here. My grandmother helped me unpack my stuff, and she began to tell me the rules of the house. She explained to me that I needed to feed the animals, to help her around the house, and things like that. But one of these rules caught my attention. She told me to never, under any circumstances, leave open the back porch at night. I thought it was strange, but I shrugged it off as just another inoffensive rule. Days went by, the farm life got to me, and I began to like it. One night, I finished up my chores around the house. I went out to smoke a cigarette. It was pitch black at the time. I went closer to the back porch because my grandparents didn't know that I smoked. A few minutes passed, and I was beginning to get cold. Out of nowhere, I began to smell sulfur and iron, like something was decaying nearby. The smell grew stronger and stronger. I knew something was wrong, but the curiosity got the best of me, and I wanted to see what was going on. All of a sudden, something crashed into the fence to my right. When I turned around, my blood ran cold. There, over the fence, I saw the silhouette of a head. But the 2 things that made me froze were that the head appeared to have horns, and that fence was 7 feet tall. This thing was at least 1.5 feet taller than that. The next thing I knew, I was running like a bat out of heck. When I made it back inside, I was pale as a ghost. When my grandmother saw me, she knew right away what had happened. She sat next to me and began to tell me that that thing has been haunting the farm for years. And that was the reason that she told me the rule about the porch. Because that thing would only enter if it was left open. She told me that that was the thing that was behind my grandfather's death. My grandfather was found dead at the edge of the farm, and everyone blamed the population of wolves around the area. Well, everyone except my grandmother. She told me that one night my grandfather was working around the house. He forgot the back porch and left the door open. Around 11 p.m. that night, grandmother heard him scream. The only thing that she saw was a tall and skinny figure running away, all the while dragging my grandfather by the head. She wanted to tell that to someone, but everyone thought that she was crazy, old, or senile. But I've seen it now. I believe her. I've seen it since then, and every time I look at it, it shakes me to my very core. But in a different way, I think I'm getting used to it. Crack, Snap, Run from LuckyRunner. This was no normal camping trip. I knew that as soon as we got to the site. Me and my two sisters decided to go on a camping trip in Manitoba, Canada. I'm the middle sister and the most outgoing, but not foolishly so. When we got to the small campsite, we noticed how the only people there was a family who was already leaving. It was the beginning of the weekend. The family even told us that it wasn't a good idea to stay there. Apparently, a series of strange sounds and noises had scared them away. But they didn't really specify what it sounded like before driving away in their van. We were a bit put off by this, but stubbornly set up camp, determined to have a good time together. We went on a walk together down one of the trails, and I decided to climb a tree, much to my younger and elder sister's chagrin at being afraid of heights, and not following my silly idea of having fun in the forest. But while I was up there, I heard large noises far off down the path. My sisters heard this as well. The noise we presumed could be a bear or moose, or another dangerous animal. I'd climbed very high up in the tree when I was trying to show off, with them being nervous about the large rustling sounds and the grunts in the distance. They were calling for me to come down quickly. I told them to book it back to camp, as my descent was a little slow on account of me trying to be safe. I told them I'd wait for whatever animal was to pass. Then I would follow my way back to camp. I'd like to point out that it was nearly twilight. That's when the animals out here move around, going back to where they want to sleep, or the night creatures beginning to stir. They agreed after complaints from my older sister. You know the basic, "You're an idiot," and "You better not fall," before they steadily jogged away. I went down a little farther, then sat still when the noise was almost near me. Through the tree leaves, I saw something that changed my perspective on life. A massive wolf that looked stretched and skeletal. It was on the path, sniffing. My head hurt with how hard it was pumping when that thing sniffed right up to the tree I was in. I didn't dare move. It looked around, then up. Bright yellow eyes stared at me. Then the creature stood up on two legs, like a person. A scream was caught in my throat, and I tried to climb up higher, again, to get as much distance between me and that thing. I tore off branches and chucked them down at the base of the tree, hoping to drive it away. I heard a grunt, and it stepped back from the tree, then spoke in a voice so similar to my sister's, yet not.
"You're an idiot. You better not fall."
The words were more drawn out than how my sister had said it, almost like it was trying to get the right pronunciation by speaking so slow. That redoubled my terror, and I chucked more and more of this tree down at the thing. It paced around the tree staring at me. Then I thought it decided I wasn't worth the effort and walked off into the dim forest. After a few minutes, I descended once again, and once I reached the bottom, I looked around before making a final jump to the mossy forest floor. As soon as I landed, I heard a crack from up a tree beside the one I was in. I looked up, and the thing was up there, looking down with a predatory gaze. I mouthed the word "how" because I had no idea how it could have gotten up there so silently without me hearing. It snapped a branch and appeared to be preparing to jump, and my brain screamed to run. I was a long-distance runner in high school, winning a lot of races, and I go on nightly runs every week. But when I say record time, I will always think of this moment, as I bolted down the path, dodging trees and jumping rocks. I could hear the breath of the thing as it raced along beside me. And I know it was a race for my life. After 10 minutes, I broke from the trees into the campground, covered in tens of scratches from my panic in the trees and the desperate run through the woods. I saw my sisters laughing beside the tent, playing that game where you put your hand behind your back and you have to touch the other person. I beelined for them, screaming for them to jump into the car. They saw the blood running down my arms and legs, and when they saw their brave middle sister bleeding and running at them, screaming to get in the car, they did not hesitate. They were inside, yelling to know what happened. My older sister was in the front seat, the younger one waiting with the door open for me to jump in. But the questions died out when they saw what was following me. I've never seen such fear in their eyes. I jumped into the car and my older sister slammed on the gas. She peeled off down the dirt road trail, leaving all our camp equipment behind. It was getting dark now, and my sister weaved down the trail in our crappy silver car like a pro. Honestly, I was surprised how calm she was. We hit the main road, and she sped all the way to a gas station. She pulled into the parking lot, and they immediately grilled me, so I told them everything. We don't really keep stuff from each other. We've always been straight up honest, even when it was hurtful, sad, or in this case, terribly horrifying. It felt like they may not have believed me completely, concerning the part where it talked in my sister's voice. It clearly disturbed her when I told her about it. We were confused on if we should call someone like the police. What do you even do in this sort of situation? My younger sister was trying to stop the bleeding from the cuts on my arms and legs and my face. I had an especially bad cut on my eyebrow that only bled more after my adrenaline left me. We were still in the woods even if we were at a gas station. The place was located off a minor backwoods highway, and we decided a $200 Walmart tent and some sleeping bags were not worth our lives to go back for. We luckily didn't put our bags with our cell phones and cameras and the expensive stuff into the tents yet, so those were fine, and we do like to make sure our clothes and things are safe and stay dry if it ever rains while camping. My older sister, being logical, decided to call the cops to make a report that there was a dangerous animal that drove us from the campsite. The authorities met us at the gas station after a couple of hours. We made our statements. We thought it was a bear. This is what we said so that we didn't appear crazy. The cops went back to collect our things for us, but they came back with nothing. Just a few pieces of shredded fabric. They closed off the campsite and the forest rangers were called in, but they never found a bear. It's been 4 years now, and we talk about it to our families. We still haven't gone back to that campsite. To whatever wolf-like creature thing that was out there, I never want to see you again, nor those menacingly yellow eyes. But you're not gonna stop us from camping, even if we have to go somewhere else. The Night Watcher, from James Y. This happened to me maybe 20 years back. I was just out of high school and was visiting my grandparents, who lived on a farm in southeastern Oklahoma, close to the Ouachita National Forest. The farm was always a peaceful place to visit. You could just sit on the porch, swing out front, and it seemed like all your troubles from home had melted away. Lots of cousins lived nearby, and they would always come over. We'd have huge country breakfasts, then some would break out their guitars and start singing. Truly felt like a magical place. Well, until the sun went down. Growing up, if I ever went outside at my grandparents' farm at night, I always got this creepy feeling. A feeling like something was watching me from the nearby woods. I would often have nightmares of something coming out of those woods to get me. Many nights sleeping in the living room on the hide-a-bed, noises in the night would stir my imagination, as if something was walking around on the front porch. Little did I know that, one day, something would indeed come out of that forest and make its presence known. One late day in my late teens, early 20s, I was lying on the bed, listening to music in the back bedroom, which we referred to as the back porch. A room was later added onto the house, which was big enough for 2 full-sized beds. It was then that I heard a scream or howl, something ungodly and otherworldly, coming from outside. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. I can't even describe how scary it sounded. It was loud, and it echoed through the hills. Whatever it was just kept screaming. It was close, possibly even in the backyard. I jumped up and ran into the living room. My mom and everyone else was busy chatting and making supper. To give you an idea of my mom, and pretty much everyone else for that matter, if you were to bust in and say you heard a strange noise outside, they would just say, and go back to what they were doing. If you said, I saw something strange in the sky, or I saw some weird creature in the forest, they'd say, and go back to what they were doing. So knowing this about my family, I rolled my eyes, and I decided to investigate for myself. I walked out the back door with nothing but a camera. Okay, I was young and stupid, but I was on a mission, and I was convinced that whatever was making this sound, it was something that probably hasn't been seen very many times by man. I thought if I could get a glimpse of it, a picture of it, I could report it somewhere as a little bit of proof of strange creatures that lurk in the woods. Whatever it was moving away from me. The screaming continued, and I followed it through the backyard, through the nearby pasture, and then into the woods. Deeper and deeper I followed this thing into the woods, each moment becoming more and more perplexed as to what that thing could be. What an idiot, I thought. This thing could be a mountain lion, a panther, who the heck knows what. I could get mauled out here. But at least I could take a picture of whatever that was about to kill me, I guess. But was the thing running from me? Was it luring me deeper into the forest? And then I realized that the sun was going down. Great, I thought. It's going to get dark in a bit, and I'm stuck out in the middle of the woods with this thing. So I turned around and headed for home, always hearing that screaming in the distance behind me. By the time I made it back to the edge of the forest and made it into open pasture, it was pretty dark, and I didn't even have a flashlight to light my way. Luckily, I made it safely back to the house. Maybe a night or two later, I was staying a couple of nights with my cousin Billy, who lived just up the hill from my grandparents. I don't remember how this started, but Billy decided, and here comes me being stupid number 2, that in the middle of the night we would wake up, walk out the back door, down the hill, through the pasture, and go for a dip in one of my grandfather's ponds. Never mind that there were water moccasins and copperheads, but whatever. And for maybe 3 or 4 nights in a row, we did this. Wake up in the middle of the night, go to the back door, walk down the hill, walk through the pasture, go for a dip, then get out, walk back through the pasture up the hill again, then go back to sleep. On about the 5th night, Billy said, "Don't wake me up tonight. Just let me sleep. You can go swimming if you want, but I don't want to go tonight." "All right," I said. So that night, I just went alone, in the dark, down to the pond. Oh lordy, it wasn't long before I got creeped out and just got out of the pond. I was making my way back across the open pasture when I caught something out of the corner of my eye. There was someone else with me in that pasture. It was very dark, so I couldn't get a good look at it. But it was tall and thin, and it stood on 2 legs. I immediately froze in fear. What was it? There wouldn't be any reason for a person to be out in this pasture at this hour. Okay, well, anyone other than me. I figured this was it. Everyone's gonna find my dead body out in this field in the morning. I don't want to go out like this. I managed to squat down onto my haunches, trying to get a better look at the thing. The moon was in the background, so I was hoping I could use it to shed more light on what this could possibly be. The thing just stood there. It didn't move, and I was too afraid to move myself. I managed to stand up again. I really couldn't see it very well. All I knew is that I had to get out of there. Finally, I found enough courage where I could slowly start moving away, beginning to head back to the road leading up the hill. After a ways, I quickened my pace, and I made it back up, steadily climbing, terrified that whatever this thing was, it would be following me, and any minute it would grab me from behind, and it all would be over. I prayed under my breath, "Please don't let it get me, please." Back at my cousin's house, I ran inside and locked the door behind me. I got dressed and went back to bed. Billy was still asleep there, but I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The following day, I told Billy about what I'd seen the night before. We went down the hill to the pond and retraced my steps through the pasture. There were absolutely no trees and no posts of any kind within that pasture that I would have mistaked for a creature of some kind. It was literally an open field, with nothing much higher than a blade of grass. So what was it that I saw that night? Maybe a night or two later, I was back sleeping on the back porch at my grandparents' house. I was sleeping in the bed with windows above my head and to my right. My cousin Sarah slept in the other bed to my left. I was awakened in the middle of the night by something tapping or knocking on the window above my head. Instantly, the fear returned. There were no lights in the backyard. It was completely pitch black, so there would be no reason for anyone to be out there tapping on my window. I didn't see any light from a flashlight either. If it was a person, to what end would they be tapping on the window? And at this hour? Even more so, how did this thing know my exact location within the house? I could have been sleeping in any number of beds in the house, but no. There it was, tapping on the window above my head. The fear that I felt is uncontrollable. You can't move, you can't speak, you can't breathe. I prayed again that it would go away, but it continued to tap, and the fear rose even higher. I heard it walk on 2 legs around the side of the house, pacing as if wondering what to do. It came back to the same window and tapped again. My heart was about to beat out of my chest. If anyone could die of fear alone, I felt pretty close to it. I literally could not move to get help or scream out. I dared not look out the blinds. Then again, it may have been too dark to see anything. What seemed like an eternity passed before it finally left. But I stayed awake the entire night, too afraid to sleep. Only when I saw the sunlight creeping in was I able to close my eyes. I told everyone about it the next morning, No one really gave it much thought, though. My cousin Billy came down and we went to the backyard by the window it had been knocking at. I wanted to see how tall it would have been to reach the window. I was freaked out, and no one really listened to me, except for my cousin Roger. He was 20 years older than me. He said that when he was a kid, Roger and another cousin of mine were sleeping on the back porch when they were awakened by something tapping on the window, which freaked them out so bad that they still remembered it. This mirrored my story. What is this thing that's been around the property for at least the past 50 years now, and what does it want? I didn't spend too many more nights there on the farm. My grandparents soon were moved to a nursing home and passed away thereafter. And under strange circumstances, the house was demolished in a fire. I tried to share my story with the BFRO, or Bigfoot Field Researchers organization, but they didn't publish my story or return my call or email. I guess they thought it was too unbelievable. But was it really a Bigfoot? It was far too thin compared to reports I've heard, and it didn't sound anything like the recordings I've heard. Was it some sort of creature like the rake? A wendigo, perhaps? I'm starting to think this could have been what I experienced. All I know is that these instances happened, and it scared the heck out of me. I don't care who does or doesn't believe me. I just know what I experienced. There's something in those woods, and maybe it didn't want us there. Or maybe it was just curious. But apparently, it's been there a long time. I believe somewhere deep within those woods in southeastern Oklahoma, it's still there. That brings us to the end of this episode of Darkness Prevails. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and send us your story so that I can narrate it. Just go to darkstories.org. If you want to support the show, check the links below. Before I go, here are the credits to my patrons who have donated or continue to donate. They're pretty great. Remember, stay safe out there, and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.